to today's event, From Skills to Strategy, Evolving Your Journalism Toolkit for the Next Era of News. The event is sponsored by the Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Rowan University. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Lillian Copenhaver, Executive Director of the Lillian Lodge Copenhaver Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Florida International University, of which we are an affiliate. Dr. Copenhaver is Dean Emeritus and Professor of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Florida International University, and we're honored to have her here today.
Thank you, Diane, and I'm delighted to be here.
Good. Next, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's event, Marian Jiaming Liu, Strategic Lead at Push Pause, where she is advising news and civic organizations on audience growth strategies, analytics, and sustainable workflows. Ms. Liu is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who has worked at The Washington Post, CNN in Hong Kong, the Seattle Times, the San Jose Mercury News, the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, and The Source. She started her career as a music critic, and in addition to her work as a journalist, has also earned her MBA. Her work represents an intersection of storytelling, data, and technology. The projects she has worked on include acting as a project editor on the Washington Post's Pulitzer Prize-winning series, The Attack Before, During, and After, which depicts the events leading up to and during the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. She also wrote a fascinating and personal piece for the Washington Post magazine titled The Power of Reclaiming My Asian Name. Today, Ms. Liu will discuss From Skills to Strategy, Evolving Your Journalism Toolkit for the Next Era of News, which traces the industry's shift from print to digital, from web to social, and into audio, video, and now AI, highlighting how each transition reshaped not just storytelling, but distribution, audience behavior, and trust. I'm going to ask audience members to put any questions that you have for Ms. Liu in the chat. And please now help me welcome Ms. Marian Liu.
Hi, everybody. It's a little weird seeing maybe later questions if you can put your videos on. Otherwise, it just looks like I'm talking to a sea of black screens. So, hello, I appreciate it. And I probably wanted to keep this pretty casual. I know it's pretty odd. I think a lot of you are sitting in the classroom looking at your computer screens, looking at me. It feels really strange, I think. So want to keep it casual. Feel free to really ask me anything. I have been in the, desk like you, figuring out my way, and still all of us are figuring out what we want to be when we grow up. So here to answer any of your questions. But you're embarking on a really difficult industry, a really difficult but really fun one. So kind of want to talk through how I kind of navigated everything, especially since things have changed so much. Difficult meaning that technology has changed a lot, but fun meaning that I have literally sat like right next to a driver on an illegal drag race. Well, helicopters raced overhead. I have been in an operating room while the surgeon is cutting. Me and the photographer, very silly, we took a selfie during that operating room. I have been backstage. I have been in tour buses. I have been able to pick the minds of the, nation's best and brightest. And I've also been able to document some of the darker, points of our nation's history too. So as a journalist, not only are you really a detective, but in many ways, you're also a counselor and you're also a history documenter. Like you really are part of the fourth branch of government, keeping things in check. So it is not only a really important, job, but it's to remind you that it's a hard one, but it's a really worthy and valuable one. So here, from skills to strategy. Nope, say they move. Okay. So kind of want to talk about the state of it all, why it matters, how it's changed, skills versus strategy. Essentially, the core skills have not changed, but kind of how you implement it has. Like, of course, you need to know the reporting, photography, and such, but how you put it and what platforms have, incredibly changed. And a little bit about how to future-proof yourself as you guys, enter the job market and figuring out what you want to do. So the state of the industry. So I want to talk a little bit about my origin story. Child immigrants, English was my second language. Um, Journalism was really a way for me to make invisible communities visible. The reality, though, is the industry is contracting, collapsing. There's a lot of burnout, and a lot of anxiety of if it's even worth it, but it is, stories still matter. Our stories still matter. Your story still matters. So this needs the strategy. So again, name is Marian, pronounced Marian, Ja Ming Liu. Ja is my generation name. All my cousins have it. It comes from a poem. So I'm connected to my um, ancestors behind me and my, descendants in front of me. The descendants, like my brother's kids, take the next word in the poem, and after that, they cycle. So we're all connected. Liu actually means willow tree. I have a very non-traditional career approach. I started out as a music critic. I did do City Hall as well, but my very first job was a music critic. And I actually come from a very traditional upbringing. Series of firsts, first generation born in the US. I was the first woman in my family to have a career, and my first job was as a music critic. So, why I became a journalist? Because I personally know the cost of not being seen or heard. I think that coming from a community that is not particularly outspoken, even when things are good, more or less when things are bad, makes it really difficult. So when the anti-Asian attacks happened during the pandemic, I really covered them before a lot of mainstream media did and volunteered to do so at the Washington Post, even though I wasn't a reporter anymore. And not only covered it when it started, but I also covered the Atlanta shooting as well. And the way we did it, we wanted to kind of tell the story from the victim, not from the effect. A lot of the other media had covered, protesters around the attacks, but we really wanted to stress the impact. So one of the seniors that I interviewed, so there's this grandpa like individual. He was going to work, he still worked. He was taking the subway in the morning and attacked. Somebody took a box knife and cut him cheek to cheek, and he bled all over the subway. And the quote that really stuck to me, it said, "Nobody helped, nobody even filmed it." And how stark that was. So we didn't want to just show like the protesters. Our front page photo and the photo that was on the homepage was his scar. So you saw what had happened to him. So you really felt viscerally what was going on with our community and the fear of going outside. This really came from, like I said, the cost of not being seen or heard. When I was in high school, I was not only a part of the high school newspaper, I did college newspaper, but not only was part of my own school newspaper, I also did the inner city newspaper. And the way they figured out coverage every month was they basically came up with a topic and then they're like, okay, let's discuss it. So the topic for that month was assimilation, and the editor straight up asked, "So, why do Asians assimilate so easily?" I was the only Asian in the room, literally. Not even, the adults in the room were Asian. And so all heads turned to me as if I had the answer for everybody. And it was bewildering and frustrating. Nobody should be put in that role. And I realized the need to speak out for my community and reflect what their needs are. Even going back further than that, why I became a journalist is really I wanted to help people and to touch them and to really make impact. I think when I was in college, I was, like probably many of you, trying to figure out what I wanted to be. And I was divided between pre-med and journalism. Though my school, I went to UC Berkeley, did not have an undergrad journalism major at the time. So I was literally working for the school newspaper, Daily Cow, and interning for various newspapers during the summers. And then during the school year was volunteering and working for the school lab so I was double major biology and mass communications. It was a lot. Nothing overlapped. I ended up being a super senior at 4.5 years because there was a lot of classes. And my junior year, my two of my really good friends passed away from cancer. One because she had a headache and it turned out to be leukemia. The other one had a stomach ache and it turned out to be ovarian cancer. Both of them were not hereditary, totally freak cases out of nowhere. But what was really hard is we were 20, 21. They didn't even like experience real love yet. They didn't even have like a real relationship yet. They didn't experience life yet. I mean, one of them, her casket was literally had stuffed animals, you know, we were kids. And I remember having to go to work in black after one of their funerals and being frustrated and sad, having to, be at work. And my friend, my coworker was like, "Well, why don't you write about it?" And I was like, "This has nothing to do with anything. Why do anybody want to know about this?" And he was like, "No, write it as therapy. Write it like a letter to their parents. Put your feelings down on paper." So I did, just wrote it all out, put it in an email, didn't give my editor any kind of notice. It was just like, "Here, tell me what you think." And expected it to, go a black hole, never be seen again. But immediately she emailed me back, like, "I want to print this. Do you have photos?" And that single story has gotten me the most response out of a lot of other stories, except for the name one, which I'll talk about later. But with people talking about this has happened to my friends and family. To even a month later, this guy told me he was lining the bottom of his bird cage and he saw my newspaper story. And he said that it made him pause and it made him cry. And that's when I realized that this is my calling, that this is what I want to do. That yes, I want to help people, but as a doctor, it's one to one. It's like giving them fish. As a journalist, you can touch a lot of people at once. It's like teaching them how to fish. So that's why I became a journalist. So, like I said, I started out as a music critic. I worked for my local paper. I was one of those nerds who saw um, the newspaper. They don't even do this anymore because they don't have the money. But the newspaper used to have company cars you can drive. And so I really wanted to drive one of those. I was a San Jose Mercury News, newspaper in Silicon Valley. Also worked for The Source, which was considered the Bible of hip hop, National Hip Hop Magazine, cover Bay Area hip hop. Um, and I didn't put it here, but uh, had interned at the Detroit Free Press, the Oakland Tribune, and the LA Times. And then later went on to Seattle Times, was their music critic. Continued to cover hip hop, covered a lot of Asian artists coming into America, wrote about their very first stories in America, to the point where it was just Lunar New Year. But what we believe is we're really into puns. People Chinese language is actually very poetic. And the word for upside down sounds like the word for coming or arrived. And I interviewed this one Taiwanese artist for his very first American, media story. And he's kind of like the equivalent of like maybe a Bon Jovi, so a little older. And in his Chinese interview profile for the Chinese newspaper, he held my newspaper story upside down, meaning he has arrived. So it's all symbolic, using my newspaper as proof that he has arrived to the US. So it was really cool. Um, from the Seattle Times, went to the South Florida Sun Sentinel, ran and launched a hyper-local entertainment site and app. My goal was the goal that I'm sure a lot of us have, is like, how could I answer the question, what is there to do tonight and what is there to do this weekend? What is cool and fun, for young people with money. And then from there, got actually into comms. Went to Sunset. Then I went to CNN in Hong Kong. There's been like 8 total newsrooms. Um, Went to CNN in Hong Kong, ran 5 of their sites in their social. That was entertainment, tech, media, travel, and business. Um, Offered because K-pop was rising. To cover K-pop, this is my background and cover music. This is when BTS was taking over the world. So had interviewed RM with no handlers on the phone. He just called me directly. And that was before he really took over. This is 2018. They really took over the US and they're coming back. They're all back from military. Um, then I wanted to, me and my husband were long distance. This will happen a lot when you're in journalism because you live a pretty nomadic life. Um, Florida and Hong Kong. So came back to Florida, got married, got into comms, really missed journalism. So started freelancing for CNN and then Washington Post, and then joined the Washington Post and launched several of their sections, created a lot of their DNA, um, launched the style section, the which is their entertainment section, the well-being, travel, and then worked on their new WP Intelligence, which was to reach global leaders. Also did a lot of work with Reynolds Journalism Institute. So, have done all the things from local news reporter to critic to social media, producer, homepage, editor, project manager, community leader, teacher, entrepreneur. Right now, I'm working on a startup. Um, but yeah, have interviewed everybody from Britney to BTS, have lots of interesting stories, have taught everywhere, including um, University of Hong Kong, as well as my alma mater at Berkeley, and created those different sections, like I had mentioned, that I'll go a little bit more into. Um, so how has journalism changed since I started? Obviously, a lot, in every single way. But the core, like I said, the same. You know, it is all about storytelling, but the platform has changed. So you're going from print to digital, which is really scarcity to abundance, from deadlines at 5 or 6, replaced by continuous publishing. So it's really changed how we live too. Um, and going from web to social, so a lot of, distribution becomes fragmented. People are finding things in other places. It's not as much journalist driven, it's audience driven. And then headlines, visuals, framing kind of have a lot of power in them because that's what grabs people to read. From there, it's gone social to audio and video, basically voice intimacy. Journalists become hosts. It's not just bylines. People want to know more about them in order to trust them. And it's really become almost a pulpit to community building. And now, as you know, it's all about AI, but that raises a lot of issues from privacy to, scale without intention. And so you have to be even more intentional than ever because you don't want to. I mean, it's become a buzzword in the way that social media was a buzzword before, social video was a buzzword before. So you have to be really intentional about how you use it. So the biggest challenge isn't really technology because that will change, but realizing that journalists, we're not really always in the driver's seat in how our stories travel. We have to be very aware about that. Um, and so a little bit about how I evolved. Um, So the reason why, and I'm sure you all feel this, I'm sure your teachers feel this, why journalism feels so uncertain. That's all the weird emojis there. Um, Newsrooms are shrinking. The Post itself, it had laid off more than 300. Atlanta, Journal-Constitution also went, like, took away their print. Things are changing fast. A lot of college newspapers, too, have also cut their print. There's a lot of burnout. We all are asked to do more with less. But on top of that, readers don't really trust this anymore. There's a lot of anxiety about AI and the dependency on various platforms, and there continues to be even more platforms. So it's very confusing out there. And what has changed the most, I've mentioned this, but distribution, how people get the news. So the gatekeepers have really changed. It's not just journalists sitting on their pedestals handing out what we think is news, but, different people, influencers and such. And so attention has changed, engagement really drives what is trending. And so things might travel faster than the context. So the meaning behind it might not travel as fast as the headline. So like I said, newsrooms no longer control how stories are spread. Platforms and audiences really do. So readers are really in the driver's seat. And also as a result of that, measures of success has always also changed. Like we can actually measure engagement now. So But as a result, there's a lot of like information overload, news fatigue, if you just measure by clicks. And the main thing a lot of media forget is now it's a community. It's a two-way communication. We're not no longer talking at readers, we're talking with them. There's comments, there's forums, and as a result, there's need for community, for connection. And so, like I said, digital made audiences very measurable, but it pushed us toward clicks, platform dependence, and well, burnout. And so, talking about a little bit how I evolved through the changes. So, as print became digital, like I said, I was a music critic. That is me. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Neo. That's me interviewing Neo. So, my first job was at my neighborhood local newspaper. I started out in print. And I could have easily, because it's such a fun thing, just like stayed doing the backstage interviews, hung out with the stars, have met many stars, including actors. I could have just done that, like had fun interviewing people, being like the face of that. But I went further than that because I was just a curious person, and that's what you have to do in journalism. I recorded my interviews because one, you need the notes, you want to be accurate. But two, since I have the audio, might as well put it online. They gave me permission. This became like podcasts before they were podcasts and got really cool stuff. I mean, not sure if you guys know, but Brian McKnight sang to me Rainbow Connection as Kermit. So like that is gold. If an artist is going to do that, you would want to put it online. Um, and then, so I launched early audio podcasts. And then not only that, I learned how to do it so I could do it myself, so I could become a one-stop shop. And then I also worked with a local television station that was doing Asian entertainment, an Asian entertainment show. And they taught me how to be behind and from the camera because they wanted content. So I'm like, I'm cool with working for you for free, but teach me how to do it. So then that way I could do a story multiple ways. So one interview, one 30-minute, 1 hour interview became the local print story, the National Trend magazine piece, a podcast, and a television piece from one story. So I could do it in 4 ways. And then going from web to social, second new job, again, as a music critic, again, could have just sat easily and done, the reviews and stuff. But this is when social media was really taking charge. So I used Twitter to take my notes during the concert because I had to take notes anyways, and I had to tweet anyways. So why don't I use it as a medium you know, to engage with audiences. And then I could also see it as a signal, but what was resonating to inform me on how to write the review. And then I uh, worked with the rest of the newsroom and co-leading our this committee to figure out what our social media guidelines and ethics should be to protect our standards. And then I also got my EMBA at UW, University of Washington, to learn how to use branding to kind of boost all that. So social really isn't, the main thing is social isn't just for, I mean, it is fun, but it isn't just for fun. It's, not just for memes and rants. It can reshape our reporting habits. It can reach people. It can, promote our stories. Um, and so later, again, for social at the Sun Sentinel CNN, really looked into analytics, how were readers engaging with us and how to cover things and how to shape it. So not coming from Florida, this really helped me. Like, how do I cover this new community in a very granular way? And learned, at least in South Florida, country music is king. So I wouldn't have known that without looking at what was really engaging with readers and realized anytime we cover country music, it's such an easy thing. Even when, artists announce their concerts, very easy story, it will do bonkers. So, like, how can we find this lower hanging fruit? And then also start working with Instagram to kind of reach distinct audiences. CNN Travel, we were rebooting our Instagram. And what's nice about CNN is we had reporters all over the world. So not only do you get really cool photos, but you get behind the scenes photos. So it really encourage them to kind of like peek behind the curtain. People always want to see that, like, how do we put our stories together? What mountains are we at? What did we climb? Such like that. So audience is really a strategy. And the whole point is, how can we meet different readers where they are without changing, the truth of the reporting? So a little bit about future proofing. So adapting how we are. So skills versus strategy. So I was like saying before, and I'm kind of going fast because I want to leave a lot of time for questions. Um, and tell me if I'm going too fast. So slow down. So sorry. Skills, which you guys are all learning. You learned this as underclassmen. How do you report? What are the W's, who, what, where, why, when? How do you put that to paper? How do you pen a story and, engage people? And then editing, how do you make that really sharp to reach people? Photographing, how do you tell things visually? And then producing, how do you put audio and video into it? But strategy is really looking at what fuels all this. What who is this story for? Is this story for like your generation? Is it for your parents' generation? Are you trying to tell both of you? Are you doing that by diluting the story? Do you feel like you're telling the story outside in, inside out? Do you feel alienated by the story? A lot of what I did as a music critic really extends to what I do now. Like if I'm doing a story about a band that is supposedly the hottest new thing, how do I make sure that I pull in not only the fan, but their mom without losing either one? Because you can really dumb down a story and then both sides would be like, I don't want anything a part of this, right? So you want to be able to do that fast. And um also like how will they even find the story? Just because you write it doesn't mean that it'll people find it. They won't find it. You have to lead them to it. And then also how can you give them a call to action? How will they share the story? How how can the story be so cool that, the kid will want to share it to the mom or vice versa, or their friends, right? You're basically answering what we always say, the so what of the story, and how are you guiding them through it? And like I said, what actions can they take? That's skills versus strategy. And then I think it's really important, like I said, to you meet your audience needs, answering that so what, how do they get there? So you go from need to findability to usefulness. Oh, I made the arrows animate. So I kind of go through the different sections that I launched. Um, and also like how I thought through this process. So the first one was the travel section for the post. Travel is a very crowded space. People won't be like, Washington Post, travel. That is not what they think. So like, how can we, make this like innovative and cool and fun? You can see the color palette too. Um, so again, tracked the user journey to reach. How can people find this page? How can we make it easy? We were in many times being too cute. We called it by the way. How will you even know that's travel? And then also like we called our mini guides 1 square guide, 1 square mile. They were not 1 square mile. We did not explain it. And we junked up the URL. And we didn't make it easy for people to jump from guide to guide. So it had to change the whole site infrastructure. And then like how do we do the Instagram site? Like how do we make it fun to go through and showcase? So our whole premise was tips from locals in big cities, like how to get through Miami, San Francisco, etc. So we wanted to make it very fun. The next one was well-being. And how do you, wellness is also a very crowded space. There's all kinds of very goopy things online among influencers. But I think what we wanted was like, how can we be different? And we wanted it very much rooted in science, very much rooted in reporting, nothing in the whole woo-woo-ness, and very actionable. And what I loved, what we did is we wanted to basically reflect bodies and shapes of all, bodies and shapes of all colors. And a lot of the wellness space is about skinny bodies, and most of us are not that. So we wanted to reflect everybody. So told, a lot of stories to that, and also worked in we tried out a TikTok with this. And then that right there is we kind of did a whole spread in Times Square about wellness. And then this culminated to work about kind of redoing the entertainment site. So we were not only did was it a site, but it was an Instagram, it was a newsletter, and then wanted to kind of reshape how we told stories and the functionality of the site. So even from the name of it down to the colors, we worked with, so you see that in the bottom right corner, basically paired staff members with potential readers, gave them pieces of what we were thinking of and had them create the site together. And from what they created, create our final thing. So everything was informed by what readers wanted. The other thing that we did was how can we bring style to the people? And wanted to do events right there, style sessions. We had a reporter interview. That's director Christopher Nolan right there. Um, and how do we make that real? So if you're going to do, and I wanted to bring it to, um, younger readers. So we did zines. So basically, and a zine is like a shortened magazine format, nice glossy paper, but inside had a comic to explain to you the history of style. If any of you saw, and I encourage you to watch this past movie called The Post. It has Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks talking about the history of the Post. And Tom Hanks plays, longtime editor Ben Bradley, and he created this section because he wanted to reflect people with style, people with flair. And most people don't necessarily know that history, so wanted to have an easy way to get into the history without writing it out in all this text when they're in an event and they can't read all of it. So did it in a comic format so people could kind of easily digest that. And as you can see right next to that comic is we did a whole mood board of to visualize and brainstorm out what do we want this section to be like and had a lot of discussions about the color pink. Um, and so this is what your professor had mentioned, my work on the insurrection. So what had happened was um, I got looped into this project months after they had started, and they wanted to document everything about the insurrection, which is nice, but really hard to do. And my worry was this story to document it was coming out maybe a year, almost a year after the actual insurrection. So my thought was, do people even care anymore? Like this was a year of the pandemic and killer bees. Like, why would people care? So looked at the top stories and found out that people were no longer searching insurrection even a week after the insurrection. So what can we do to get this in people's hands? So that meant we need to go where they are. So it had to be on every single platform, and people could not escape our story. So as you can see, it was on TikTok. It was on, we had emails. We had it online. We had Twitter, Facebook, even like an online, event and a reader Q&A. We had live talks with sources. We're on every single surface we could be. We did alerts too and podcasts. And for Twitter, as you can see him seated there, Dave, on the leather chair, did it in three kind of cool ways. Because as you know, TikTok is a fun medium, almost like dad humor medium. And this is a very serious topic that's hard to get into. So how can we reflect that, and be true to the platform? So we did three posts. One was pretty standard the way we did on Twitter and Facebook. This is when Twitter was still Twitter. Um, we just had photos of red flags that led to the insurrection, what went down that day, and the repercussions. So pretty standard. The second one is because you need to be aware that people get news in different ways. We did it with audio, so that's why you see a desktop phone. You literally heard the threats that were called in as voicemails of people wanting to scale the Capitol. So it was very visceral. This, um, and also again, very serious. And then the third post, we played up to TikTok's actual tone. So brainstormed this out with the team, had Dave play the old guy, sitting there, contemplating. And then the intern came over and asked Dave, do you even remember what happened on January 6th? And he's like, no. And then that's it. And the caption just read, to find out more, here's the link. So played up the tone. Um, and also worked on this thing that's a little bit like Time 100, but we wanted to cover are the next leaders across the US. We called it Post Next and really worked across social for this. We did a lot of collaboration posts on Instagram, so we were able to reach different audiences. I don't know if you people are Fourth Wing fans, but interviewed Rebecca Yaros there, and she shared it on her Instagram. So it was a whole strategy to try to reach younger people, and really reflect who are the leaders of tomorrow. Um, so this is a little bit about what I have been doing. So I'm calling it currency of impact. Looking into how to really do engagement. I worked with URL Media to look beyond clicks, kind of shift the success from like just clicks to looking at engagement. Are people commenting? Do reporters, get invited to speak? Is there legislative change? Are readers making change? Also worked with Kansas City Defender. That's the creator right there, Ryan, on he is very much Instagram first. How do they do what they do down to color and messaging and basically make a template for other people? So looking really into measuring what matters, not just traffic. Um, and oops. And right now, like I said, with Push Pause, my own startup, looking at helping and advising news and civic audiences on growth and analytics, working with it's this whole kind of collaborative composition, collective open news NC local to help them figure out. So North Carolina was hit pretty hard by the hurricane last year, and they realized they needed resources to help figure this out. So this is a newsroom wide look on how do you create resources and how do you go offline to provide such resources, a guide online to cover disasters, and working with a Florida nonprofit news out of Jacksonville on how to expand. And actually, Lillian, we've been talking with FIU on using them as a prototype, because they're a staff of 8. They can only do so much to cover the state. But how can we train up students who need to learn about real life journalism to help us with what impacts so many of us, school board elections? And that's not only what impacts us as students, but where a lot of politicians start their political career and where a lot of impact happens and is not covered. So we're working with Florida universities to start covering that election, which is happening this summer. And then working on a startup for immigrant communities. So let's see, I have a couple minutes. I'll go through this quick. AI as a journalism risk. It's inventing things out there. You can look these up. Chicago sometimes it made up books for their summer list. It was pretty scary. Reinforcing bias. CNET had a personal finance story that was all made up. So you worry about the people who are, trusting that. And even Sports Illustrated not only made up the stories, but they made up the reporters that wrote up the stories, complete with made up photos. So also very scary. But it also can be a tool. Um, and I put some examples of AI platforms you can try. I've mostly used ChatGPT, but Gemini is also really good. So research assistance, it really helps you with data, a lot to compile it, can go faster. Language translation, also, Google Translate has gone so much easier, especially when you translate. And then, like I said, for data, not only can you help find the data, it can help find patterns. So it can help you tell trend stories and accessibility and scale. A lot of your professors might already use Otter AI to take notes, stuff like that. So it can really extend our reach, more access, more languages, more insight. And so to really kind of summarize survival to strategy. So AI can really help you automate the boring stuff. Nobody wants to do it, like taking notes, transcribing the notes, finding the, patterns in the data. But you want to always think about you're serving people, not the traffic. You're not like, it's not all about clicks. And then, for all of you that are figuring out this is what you want to do, the most important is practice, practice, practice. Nobody comes out as a beautiful writer and reporter in the beginning. All of us, it takes a lot of practice, and actually editing makes your pieces better. It's the editing, not always the writing, that makes it really shine. Um, and really quick advice on getting into and staying in journalism. So own it. A lot of you know about things that the editors sitting in the, shiny offices will never know, because those editors are trying to reach your generation. So own what you know, think about like really a trend is 3 things. 3 things make a trend. I would always buy my purses by if they fit a notebook. You guys don't necessarily need to do that. You could just put it in your phones or record it into your phones, so just be aware. I feel like Labubus are kind of out now, but all the media companies wrote about that too late, like months late. They wrote about when it's on the way out. I'm sure you all knew when it was on the way in, that kind of thing. Um, and then consistency, like right. Reach, think about not just like your skills like reporting, but how can you pair that with a distribution skill like SEO, analytics. And then I think it's always important, especially how I got to where I am. You want to find mentors, collaborators, make your work bigger together, and always be curious. So that's everything. That's my email. I'll put it here in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me if you have more questions.
Wonderful. Thank you
Kind of
so
sped through that real
much.
fast.
No, great. Thank you for your email. Thank you so much for what an amazing talk. What an amazing background life you've had. Fascinating.
Thank you.
Um, we have and excellent insights into the industry. Um, so we have a number of questions from students. A lot of them, I'm just going to try and condense some of them.
Okay.
Some of them talk about what you see, how your identity, and you talked a little bit about this, but how your identity has informed your work without being biased in any kind of way, but still kind of, being a journalist, but yet, um, allowing your identity to inform you without letting it bias you, I guess, is the gist of some of the questions.
Yeah. Um, I think that because I didn't start out as a traditional journalist, I was a music critic. So a lot of traditional journalists don't necessarily um are comfortable with putting themselves out there or their opinion. I think I started out my career with being a little bit more comfortable about that because my opinion is in there, but also I was careful in putting boundaries around that, like what my opinion was on, I think was important. So if it's about the concert, I leave it to the concert. I am not airing out my political opinions or anything else out there. I'm also very careful on my own social media. I do not share my political opinions on social media. I actually don't really share it in general. It's you just want to be careful as a journalist that you want to have that line. So like when my friends were wearing, I was so sad not to wear it too, but when my friends were wearing the buttons that said Asians for Obama, I can't wear a button like that. I can't sign a petition, but that makes it easier. That means I don't have to sign any petitions. I can just keep walking. So I just make that line clear. And then when I was covering the anti-Asian attacks, I was covering them as news, like this was happening if I cared about something, and this is what I did because I went to a very activist college, right, with Berkeley. So if I cared about something, the way I would personally protest is I covered the issue so more people can learn about it and they can make their own decision. I didn't actually personally protest, but that's how I would show how I supported things. And so if I cared about something, I would cover it, but you cover it from both sides. Obviously, for Asian attacks, nobody wants to be attacked. That's a very black and white thing. It's not cool to,
Right.
attack old people, but you kind of
Ah,
go deeper into it. So I want to share with you, we actually had a lot of talk. There was a preconceived notion that a lot of the attackers, because of social media, were black. And a lot of the Asian community members had that view about it. And so what was actually rare is my editor on the project was black. And I raised this issue with her. Like, of course, it's clicky to like put that in the headline or put that in the story. But what I appreciate is we talk through it coming from both our communities because we're very aware of how you put that in the headline and you hurt both. You hurt both communities. So we talked it through and we came with the conclusion is there are no statistics. How can there be any statistics? There's no way to prove this. Social media shows you one view. So we did not even want to entertain that theory. So just being very thoughtful on how, and also being very thoughtful, like what visuals do we use? And I do this for all my interviews and the stories I've done. Like, who am I interviewing? If it's an Asian story, I want the sources, I want the experts to be Asian, down to the academics. I want them to be speaking from personal experience. So I would go the extra mile for that. So it's just being very careful about what you are putting out there, not only words wise, but image wise, down to the social media, everything, because I know personally the impact it would have on somebody seeing it like on an Instagram post or on a TikTok, and it can hurt. Like one fast decision can hurt. And I'll give you another example. Like when like Everything Everywhere at Once, when all those Oscars, all Asian cast, um, the only actor the Post could get to interview was Jamie Lee Curtis. And I was asking the editor, like, hey, you got the only non-Asian star in a, history-making moment about Asians. And it was not meant with malice. That was the biggest star they could get. But as an Asian community member, I was like, if I saw this, I would stop my subscription. You do not see me. Why do I need to see you? So you just want to be careful about the impact. And I think that when I was in college, I studied mass communications, which is really like, how is media affecting communities? How are people, because it does, we are writing history. So just being very careful about impact and how things might be interpreted, I think. So just even in my story, it's just holding the line and not being like, I want this or this. And that is, just being very careful about that. So my Instagram is just like food and cats, like I don't share any of that. I don't go to protests as much as I would have wanted to, but
Mhm.
instead would cover it.
Yeah, that's smart. And that's good for students to hear because you have to be careful,
Yeah. And
about what
down
you're
to,
saying.
I'm sure everybody has fun, right? But if I go have fun with my friends, I'm not, I take because friends like to tag. I turn my tagging off,
Mm,
a lot of times. So they can't even tag me, or I make sure I'm not in the photo, or I'm like, I will back out, or I will be unidentifiable. Not that I don't go, out with a night with girlfriends. I just make sure
okay.
you don't see me on social media later.
Yeah, no, that's smart. Um, okay, we have another question. This is from a student. Journalism is such a cutthroat industry, as you stated in an interview with the Foster School of Business. What advice do you have for students who want to make a name
So did
for
you look me up?
themselves?
Was that a past
Yeah,
interview?
yeah,
Okay. Um,
yeah. How
it
can students
is.
make a name for themselves? How can they brand themselves?
I kind of put that you want to find what is your groove, are you good at, what is, as they would put in business, your unique value proposal. And I think that a lot of times students don't realize how much power they have because media is trying to reach you. So you know what is resonating. You know when a piece of content is not hitting right and is lame. I mean, even when I was proposing to be a music critic, most music critics are old white men still now. And I was one of the youngest and probably one of the only female, definitely the only Asian female writing for Source magazine, um, which is, a black magazine. And the way I got in was I was, reading the coverage and noticed, hey, when you cover this artist, you completely miss the point on why they're cool. Or like, you didn't even cover this one. What is going on? This coverage is so whack. It's like, this is just bad coverage. You keep missing the point. And I didn't tell that to the editor. I was just like, hey, how come you didn't cover this? How come you didn't cover this? Like I found out who the editor was in charge. And I'm like, why don't you cover this and cover this and cover this? And I think to her credit, she wasn't like, okay, little girl, go away. She was just like, hey, why don't you try a piece then? Let me see what you got, is what she said. And so I wrote a piece about genre I don't really listen to. It was Hawaiian slack key, did okay, then then she asked me to do another one and then another one. And then I started pitching to her about things I thought were important. And then there was even one where there was a huge DJ that was dropped from the local station and people were protesting um, him being fired. And it, it was a big deal, but nobody was covering it. And I pitched the story about him being let go and not my newspaper paid attention to me. They let me write the story. And not only that, they hired him as a columnist because they knew that he resonated with people. So they trusted me with that. So it's also building that trust, which I had to earn. Each step I always had to earn that trust for them to like believe in what I was saying and that I knew. So I think it's kind of building I mean, we call it a beat, your beat out what your expertise is. Um, I joked that my expertise at the Post was like happy and sad. Like I was the one who covered anything dealing with K-pop or anti-Asian attacks. So both ends of the spectrum. I was the one who was being called. But you kind of want to, you know, people got to know what you can do.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, Another question, a couple of questions about this, but now that because audience have shifted, platforms have changed, et cetera, like, the idea of having a great story, you still have to have that skill, knowing a story when you see it. And we know this is a great story, kind of like what you were just saying with the DJ. How do you make sure it reaches audiences? Like, how do you get it to that next
Yeah.
level?
Yeah, that's kind of like what I was doing with the insurrection story. So you have to be where people are. You can't expect them to come to you. Like only like the super nerds are going to be like, WashingtonPost.com. Let me look at the homepage. Let me check in every hour, which is what us journalists think. Like, let's change the homepage every hour, even every 30 minutes. People are not behaving that way. How many people do that, you know? Um, Maybe at the most they might check in the morning or afternoon, like during lunch, but they're not going to be checking in all the time. And that's only like maybe your super fans. People are not, most people may be looking at it, through Apple News or if it comes on their Instagram or if there's like you kind of need to go where people are. You can't expect them to come to you. That it doesn't work like that anymore.
And so is
People
it,
don't wait for the news on their front porch anymore.
yeah,
That's not a reality.
right. So is it kind of a sense of blanketing or targeting or both?
It's both. So it depends on your story and who you would want to reach. Yeah, so it's both.
That makes sense. Um, we have a super Britney Spears fan here, and he wants to know
Oh, he.
what it was like to interview her.
Is this
What was
Maddie?
that
He's
like?
covering his face. Sorry to call you out. She was fine. She was not the stereo. I think people really have demeaned her as maybe, I don't know how to put it, not as smart. I think Mariah is too. They were smart. I'm sure since you are a fan, you know about her tragic story. A lot of times when I interview artists, I ask them, is this a life you would want your kids, want for your kids? And all of them have said no. It is tougher than you think. You really don't know who your friends are. You're surrounded by a lot of enablers and you see that. But also realize that when you're interviewing people, you might get at the most a couple hours if you're like ridiculously lucky, but usually 15, 30 minutes. If you think about it, if you met somebody new for 15 minutes, how much are you actually sharing about who you actually are? So you want to put that in context. So it's really hard to figure out like how do you capture who they are in that brief amount of time. And so you have to be get very skilled at getting them comfortable, getting them to share, and then figuring out how do you reflect that back. So it's a lot. And it involves a lot of, that's why people do like, I'm sure you've seen this, response questions, kind of gauge, like, are you a cat or dog person? That says a lot about
Should
somebody
I
even.
leave it?
So, um, so yeah, I think she was fun and she was nice. I didn't get I think she's depicted as lost and maybe not that bright. I did not get that sense. I think that she's been through a lot and I feel for her.
Mhm. Thank you. That's great. What is your best advice for people coming into the industry today? That's what a lot of students want to know. Like, what should they be focusing on? What maybe even first steps?
Um, the traditional jobs are gone. You're not going to be, I don't know how many of you watched that movie, Almost Famous, like for Rolling Stone. Um, that movie came out kind of like when I was starting my career. So my friends were calling me Almost Famous. That kind of career where you're like a magazine, like that romanticness, so you're a magazine reporter, writing a story that doesn't have to be turned in for like a couple months and you get to travel for free, that is gone. Sadly, that is gone. Um, I think that what the jobs are there. What is interesting though is the mainstream jobs. like say for the Washington Post, or other papers, are fewer and far between, but you have alternative magazines and sites from all over. And a lot of those sites are more civically and service minded and even might be more politically inclined. So you are freer to flex your opinions. But I also would warn you that if you do, then that might not be your job forever, and that will be always out in the internet. So you want to be careful about that, about what you want to share, who you want to work with. Um, like I was talking to a mentee whose colleague talked about how he would always bash one, columnist, and it did crazy page views. But I was like, but what about his next job? Like you want to be, thinking about like how you're putting yourself out there. Um, and the technical ones like data reporting, audience analysis, being able to do like engineering and create things, tend to have more jobs out there, but it is also a weird time where I think media organizations are trying to figure out, well, where does AI fit in all this? It's just a buzzword. I think we'll soon find out that it's not the all knowing solution that we might think it is. As you saw with what like Sports Illustrated, CNN, Chicago Sun-Times did. So we're all figuring that out right now. But I think you want to learn the basic skills, reporting, get all that down. And like I said, learn some kind of distribution skill along with it, whether that's marketing, SEO, analytics, and pair that up. And I think that will, and the most important thing is to start working. And what's nice is there used to be certain walls, like if you work in marketing, you can't go into journalism. I think that's a lot more fluid now. So, if the Post did hire people from social media that worked in marketing firms. So I would get a job where you can, and then like make the best of it to work. It's much more fluid. I think the before people were like, comms, gross. I also did comms, and I got back. Okay, so it's much more fluid and it can be actually more fun and pay more too, to tell the truth.
Truth. Good. I think we have time for one more question, Marion. And a couple students asked this, but what is your favorite piece that you've worked on? Like, what would you say is like
My favorite
what
piece.
you enjoyed most? A project that you enjoyed the most, or one of the projects you enjoyed the most. Maybe it's hard to identify just one, but
That early one where I wrote My Friends really changed the trajectory of what I became. Like it helped me find my calling as a journalist. And then the other one, and it speaks to your question about biasness. I didn't write my opinion about how the anti-Asian attacks affected me until after I covered it. And that became the piece about my name. Because I realized that even though I was trying to do everything I could to cover my community, I was also hiding. That when I was interviewing victims, they were advised, because I would also tell them, like, hey, I'm Asian too, I'm female. Hey, we're the demo that's being hit the most. Yeah. And they would caution me like, hey, wear sunglasses, cover your hair, cover all signs of Asianness when you're out there. And Florida doesn't have a lot of Asians. So even before the pandemic, always have gone in stares and stupid questions. And I'm often the only Asian in a lot of rooms. And it's hard, just like when I was in high school. You get stupid questions like that. Um, and I I realized that I never uh was upfront, like especially after covering the Atlanta shooting, where a lot of the victims' names kept being mispronounced. And for many of us with ethnic names or hard to pronounce names, it just feels it's so frustrating. It's like another death. And so for so many of us, we use fake names at Starbucks to that point, right? Like my husband uses a fake name as Starbucks. Um, and so I realized that who I am, I was not being myself fully there. And wrote this piece about like I'll put it in the chat. Um, um, wrote this piece about how I was really reclaiming that and how I put it in my byline. And um, it was a really raw piece that I'm working on making into a book And it's been a tough process because when you write about yourself versus when you write about other people, it's always, when you write about yourself, it's always harder about how much you really are willing to excavate and tell to people.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think we are right at time, just about at time. Thank you so much, Marion.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time today. The students had a wonderful
Can
time.
I take a picture? Can people
Of
stay
course.
and put their video on? Is that okay?
Yeah, can you guys
Just
put your
wanna,
video on?
just for me to
Some
remember
people have had
this.
to leave because we're switching classes at the moment, but yeah, if you want to put your video
Give me a second to unspotlight
on.
so you'll be able to see
Everybody.
more.
Okay.
That should be a little bit better there for you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Nice to see faces, huh?
Thank you all,
Great.
and feel free
Thank
to
you.
email me if you have questions.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And thank you, Lillian Copenhaver, for helping to sponsor this. And it was wonderful to hear you and really appreciate the talk.
Yeah,
Thank
and let me know if you have any other questions. Take care out there.
All right. Thank you.